Teacher School Workers of Reddit. What was the worst conference you ever had with a parent? Story 1. When I was student teaching, my mentor teacher was accused of failing a girl because she was black. The girl herself never said anything about it, but her parents sure did. When it came time for a conference, everyone was there: the girl, her parents, the principal, a counselor, my mentor, and me. My mentor let the parents have their say, explain their reasoning there wasn't much, and continued to accuse her of being racist. Once it was her turn to reply, my mentor reached in her bag and pulled out a family portrait. It was of herself, her black husband, and their biracial daughter. She just sat on the table, and the girl's parents immediately stood up and left. I haven't seen anything like it, or as hilarious, since. Story 2 had a student who was confirmed as being abused by her stepfather. He was a convicted offender on parole who was living with the mother and 2 other children when he was found to be raping his stepdaughter and was immediately sent back to prison and charged with rape. The mother came into the yearly conference and immediately started complaining that her daughter's grades had slipped from all A's and BS to all CS, DS, and FS. She said her daughter was lazy and a liar. I wanted to jump across the table and punch her over and over again. The mother claimed, to the police and again in court, that her daughter made it all up. The daughter only came forward when she discovered that her stepfather had started raping her 9-year-old sister. She had kept quiet until then because he threatened to rape the younger sister if the older daughter, age 13, said anything. He started on her when she was 8, but the mother just kept harping on how her daughter was lazy and uncooperative. I've never wanted to harm another adult as much as I did this woman. Story 3. A decade ago, I had an 8th grade student who was in all remedial classes. Her life's ambition at the time was to be like the girls on Jersey Shore and to have a part on a reality show. I didn't have her for any academic classes, only a less than 30-minute homeroom. One day, I called her mother to try to get a form signed and returned, and I let her mother know that she had been in trouble in homeroom for some very loud, very explicit talk that she wouldn't stop after being repeatedly warned. The mother went berserk. She demanded to know exactly what her daughter had said, and I was ready with some quotes. That morning, the kid had been going on and on about a super big. The mother demanded a conference immediately, so I let the team leader know, and he scheduled one. The teachers who had the kid for academic classes were astounded. They've been trying to get the parent to come in or at least respond to anything all year, to no avail. The parent, before the conference, attempted to call me multiple times daily, leaving furious, accusatory messages about all the terrible lies I was telling, and that her daughter knew nothing about and had no idea what it even was, and that I was a sick person. The day of the conference arrives, and the parent shows up red-faced and fairly vibrating with anger. The academic teachers start to speak to her about her child disrupting their classes, never completing assignments, etc., and she cuts them off. She announces that her child has some shocking news to disclose about me. I was about 6 or 7 months pregnant at this time. The child lifts her head and, with tears in her eyes, says that I had traumatized her because I said that I hated my baby and wished I could just get rid of it, and that she couldn't even look at me without wanting to cry because of how awful I was. It was like a crazy scripted reveal moment from one of the reality shows the girl was obsessed with. It was utterly surreal. I cut her off. I told her that it was laughably transparent, that she was trying to take the heat off of herself by making outrageous and irrelevant accusations, and that I was disgusted that her mother would fall for something so ridiculous. Then I told the parent to pipe down and listen to the academic teachers because her kid wouldn't make it out of 8th grade if something didn't change. I had the girl put into another homeroom on the spot, got my enormous self upright, and waddled the out. Story 4. I had a meeting with a student who was failing 10th grade English and her dad. He marches into my classroom and says, "I don't like my student's grade. What can you do to make this right, dude? This isn't a restaurant. I'm not going to comp your grade because you threw a fit. If your kid hasn't done her work or come to a single tutoring session, that's not my fault." Story 5. Mine is a little different. No angry parents, just EW. I was teaching grade 7 during my internship and was speaking to the parent of a high-need student. Without going into too much detail, the girl we were speaking of had little to no long-term or working memory and limited ability to communicate needs and wants. Anyways, her mother was complaining to us about the bus driver and told us, and had scabies last month, and I don't think he even bothered cleaning her seat on the bus. My partner teacher and I just stared at each other for a second. The mother hadn't informed the school about the kid having scabies. We hadn't cleaned her desk, the couches, or anything else, and I let this kid hug me every day. I took like 6 showers that night. Story 6. I have told this story in a similar thread, but it worked for this one as well. My wife is an elementary school teacher and suspected that one of her students may be autistic. The kid wouldn't communicate well at all, had issues with using the bathroom, and showed other classic signs of autism. My wife had a conference with the mother and explained that she would like him to be evaluated, but the mother refused and said that if her son did have autism, my wife was the one who caused it. My wife has learned to handle those situations much differently now. Being accused of causing autism will do that. Story 7, I had a mother come in on parent-teacher night with her daughter in tow. This isn't allowed, but a lot of parents do it. The girl is on IEP, but ID never had to offer her any accommodations or modifications. She was a terrific student with a 99 average. I told her mother as such, and said I would also like to see the girl speak up more and not be afraid of her voice. She was always volunteering in class, but when she spoke, she did so in a whisper. She was confident in her knowledge, but not confident in letting people hear her. The mother said, "What can she improve?" I laughed, but the mom looked very serious. So I just said, "Honestly, nothing really. She has a 99 average. There's not much to improve on." The mother said, "I understand that. But what about everything else? How is her organization?" I replied that I didn't know of any problems with organization, seeing as she turned in all her homework on time and was obviously prepared for every test and quiz. Mom pressed me further to tell her something her daughter was doing poorly at. So I apologized for not having anything to add other than that her daughter was a model student. I gave the poor girl a wink as they left and hoped she'd find the humor in the situation. This doesn't sound like an awful conference experience. But the following week, the girl's performance tanked. She couldn't find her homework. She was suddenly scrambling to study in the moments before the bell rang, and she started second-guessing herself whenever she volunteered an answer to a question. It was like hearing her mom's assumptions that something was going poorly completely psyched her out. She would never be good enough. It sucked. Story 8, I have one for this. I'm a 7th and 8th grade teacher in Philadelphia. This young man's mom had gotten him identified as gifted. When I taught him, he was failing multiple classes, refused to do any work, slept through classes, and took no responsibility. She came in a conference, all the teachers are in the same room, and parents circulate. Ignored everyone except for 2 of us. Interrupted an ongoing conference. The math teacher was having to berate him for being a race traitor and bringing down her son out of ignorance. Came over to me, the English teacher, and when I stood up and extended my hand, she just looked at it. She then looked me in the eye and told me, "No, you're not even worth it." She turned around and started out of the room, cursing the staff to no one in particular. The Spanish teacher tried to talk to her and got cursed out, so the Spanish teacher called security to have her escorted out of the building. The mom then tried to use evasive maneuvers to avoid security, but was eventually caught and escorted out. Told she was no longer welcome on our premises. She tried to sneak into the next conference, but was caught. Follow-up story, this was her middle child. Her oldest had already graduated from the school K-8, and her youngest was in 3rd grade. When the youngest was in 5th grade, they went on a trip to Canada, and she followed against direct instruction from administration. In her own car, showed up at the place they were having dinner where there wasn't a seat for her, so she sat at her own table and ordered something for herself. She then tried to stay at the hotel where the kids were staying, and when there wasn't an extra room, tried to go in where her kid was. When that obviously didn't work out to her expectations, she took her kid and drove back home that night. So, yes, she sucked. Story 9, when I was student teaching, I sat in on conferences with my cooperating teacher. One girl showed up to the conferences dressed up nicer than I've ever seen her at school, sat up straight, and was smiling from ear to ear. It was really awkward when the main teacher told her parents she was reading below grade level, failing math, and had not passed the spelling test this quarter, had the confidence and presence of a valedictorian, though. Story 10, had a conference with a parent about their child's performance. Mom kept asking me if I thought there was something wrong with her daughter 1st grade. I explained that she was capable, but needed to do the homework that was sent home and could use some extra practice in a few areas. She continued to ask if I thought something was wrong with her. I continued to say no. At the end of the conference, she asked one more time and added, "Because if you think there is, the doctor is ready to give her meds. You just need to fill out this form." Story 11, I was a 1st-year teacher, and I have a very young face. When I go out with my sister 5 years younger, I get carded, and she doesn't. When you look like your students, you have to do whatever you can to maintain your position of authority in the class until you get well established in the school. So I try to dress in a very formal way to set myself apart from the students. When I went into my first parent-teacher conference, I was wearing a sweater that had a kind of fastener on the sleeves, and I had accidentally twisted it before I buttoned it. Not all that noticeable, but the mom I was conferencing with saw it. Before I could stop her, there was a rush of mothering and a, "Oh, here, honey, let me fix that." She had my sleeve unbuttoned and rebut-toned correctly before I could even back up. Her kid was behind her with his head in his hands. He was super embarrassed, and I looked like a little kid whose mom had to help her get dressed. Not my finest hour, but actually a pretty funny one looking back on it. Story 12, in my 2nd year of teaching theater for middle school. I had a parent demand a conference with myself and our principal. She expressed that her son could no longer be in my theater class because all that stuff makes you gay, which for her will be the absolute worst thing that could happen. It was my first slap in the face that no matter what work you put in, that in the end of the day, the parents will push and pull their kids in life for better or worse. Our principal was outraged by the parent comments, but held the parents' decision with respect because really there's nothing we could do. Since this experience, I've planted the idea that the only obstacle that will prevent you from greatness is yourself, not your friends, family, teachers, etc. Ironically, the student joined the class because of the ratio of female to male students that set roughly 101. Thus, parents, if you have any concerns with your children about anything, talk to them before making assumptions. Perspective matters. Story 13. I had a student this year who clearly has a learning disability, but he's a wonderful student in the class and I adored him and celebrated the successes he had. This child, despite clearly needing accommodations, did not have an IEP or basically special education services for those not in the field. So conferences roll around and I bring up his academic struggles, second grader capable of barely kindergarten level work, expecting them to fight me when I suggest that he needs special education testing. I mean, why else would this child who is clearly struggling not have an IEP if his parents are aware, not in denial? Nope, they totally agree and want him to get help. Okay, great. Let's talk background a bit. Oh, he was retained in first grade and he only went a half of the second year of first grade. Well, what was he doing the first half? Some story about bio mom not allowing him to go to school. Okay. What about kinder? Oh, he only went a half of that too. Okay. Well, with absences like that, I don't know if they will test him, but it'll go to bat if you guys make a serious effort to have him here every day. They agree. Yay, we are on the same team. We're going to get this kid who totally deserves it some help, and he will not fall through the cracks on my watch. I call and email everyone I can until someone agrees to test him despite his lack of educational time. Really go above and beyond, because I love this 8-year-old. Things go really well. He makes progress. He's there almost every day. Then absences start happening. Parents show up 2 to 3 hours late to pick him up. Then he's gone for multiple days at a time. Vague bullshit excuses when I call. Then he's gone for 10 solid days. I call. We just haven't felt like taking him to school, but I'll bring him Monday, promise. He hasn't been back to class, so he's withdrawn from my class, and they haven't enrolled him anywhere else. Of course, we've sent truancy officers, but this is Las Vegas, and we are last in education for a reason. So, yeah, that's my worst conference. They told me they would do their best for a kid I loved, and they lied to my face. Story 14, not formal conferences, but meetings. A few come to mind. One, I was working in a kindergarten classroom, and a father had approached me and asked me if I let his son play in the kitchen center. I replied with something along the lines of, yes, we allow each of the children to freely explore what interests them and explained why, but Dad was unhappy about it. He immediately asked me to stop this, as allowing his boy to pretend like he's cooking will make him gay, too. Was teaching at a preschool. And a mother had approached me and a few other teachers as she was concerned about her 3-year-old son's behavior. She was asking all these questions about who he plays with, what he likes to play with, and so on. She then expressed concern that he had an undescended testicle, which will turn him into a homosexual. She wanted us to keep our eyes on his behavior and stop him from acting gay. 3. Recently, I had a conference with a family regarding one of my current students who will be attending kindergarten next year. I expressed all of my concerns, and this child has many concerns, cognitive delays, speech concerns, a few minor behavior concerns. And asked Mom her thoughts and concerns. She had none. Absolutely none. In fact, her child is perfectly equipped to handle kindergarten next year and will not struggle one bit. Never mind the fact that he can't count higher than 3 and doesn't understand the difference between letters and numbers, despite having daily exposure for 2 years now. Story 15 copied from an earlier post. So forgive the slight diversion from the question here. I was relating an incident from over a decade ago when I was a long-term substitute teacher for someone who took maternity leave and then never came back. Most of the kids were good, but a few convinced me to find another career. This particular example happened early after the 5th time I asked her to stop talking to her friends during class. I threatened to send her down to the office. She told me that if I did that, she'd tell everyone I tried to rape her. I told her she probably shouldn't have said that in front of 20 other witnesses and told her to get out of my class and go to the office. She flounced out in a huff. About an hour later, I had to stop teaching another class in order to answer an urgent summons from the principal. Apparently, Miss Chatterbox had called up her mother, who was now in the principal's office, and bitching about how she had to miss work because yet another evil teacher was hassling her daughter. She proceeded to ream me out for 10 minutes, complaining that I not only hated her daughter and had it in for her, but have hated her for months. had repeatedly made up stuff to get her daughter in trouble, and according to her daughter, had been ogling her like a creep all year. She demanded that the principal fire me and apologize to her daughter. I looked at the principal and said, "Do you want to tell her, or shall I?" The principal sighed and explained that I was a substitute teacher who had started yesterday and had only met the daughter this morning. This didn't slow Mom down for a second. She doubled down and demanded I be fired immediately nonetheless. The saddest part is that the principal had obviously been through this all before many times. Story 16, I had a parent get mad at me because I failed her student on a project. She called a meeting with me and an assistant principal. We both tried in vain to explain that the project wasn't even due yet, that her child was right on track in terms of being prepared to turn everything in on time, and that her daughter was doing just fine. She then tried to complain that I was failing her daughter because her daughter thought I was mean and wouldn't come to morning tutorials because she was afraid of me. I told her it was impossible for me to fail her daughter for not coming to tutorials since they are in no way tied to grades, and furthermore, her daughter was not failing my class. She was making a low B, which is perfectly acceptable in a more rigorous pre-AP class. Most irrational person I ever met. She insisted on having her daughter transferred from my class. Edit to add the family was not Asian, nor from another country. Just good OL Murica crazy. Story 17, I had a call on a dad of one of my high school girls after she got with me. Refused to do any work and was failing. He spent the entire conference with his phone in front of his face. He took a phone call while I was talking to him, and he got my name wrong several times. The girl was a little, but suddenly it all made sense. Story 18, when the kid and his dad showed up. Hi. Dad almost had a freak out because of some desk toy I have, and the son kept slumping forward because he was about to pass out. Poor kid never had a chance. Story 19, my mom is a teacher and told me about her worst parent-teacher conference. There was a kid who had developed major behavior problems, so she called the parents in for a conference. Only the mother showed up to the conference, which isn't all that uncommon. The mother apparently reeked of alcohol and cigarettes, and came in dressed in ratty old jeans and a top exposing her midriff. My mom sits the mother down and asks her if she was aware that the child hadn't been doing his homework and had been to the principal's office about 4 times in the past month for harassing other students. The mother of the student goes, "Yeah, I'm not too surprised by that. His dad walked out on us a while ago, and they just found him in Florida." My mom, being an understanding lady, says she's sorry the father did that, and offers a list of resources attorneys so she can sue for child support, women's shelters, food banks, and so on. The other mother laughed and said, "Oh no, we won't need any of that. They only found his arm. The rest was fed to the gators." My mom sat there in horror as the mother elaborated. Apparently the father owed a few people some money and had no intention of paying them back. So the people found him and fed him to the gators. The only reason they knew the arm was his is because his fingerprints were in the system for several domestic violence charges. She instructed my mother not to tell the student how the father died. As far as he knew, his dad died in an accident, not a homicide. The kid ended up all right in the end. He went on to graduate and get a job. To my mother's knowledge, he never found out the truth about his dad, but I really can't judge him for acting out in grade school. TLDR, a kid started acting up in school, and it turns out it was because his dad walked out on the family and was then fed alive to alligators. Story 21, parent yelled at me for probably 3 minutes straight because I didn't call him when his child didn't show up to my classroom. He never talked to me about doing it, and I had no idea the kid had suicidal tendencies. Apparently the kid tried to kill himself several times in the 1-minute walk to my classroom. If no one told me, how am I supposed to know what happens outside my door? 2, a different parent complained to me that no one knew where her child was, like she hadn't seen the kid in over a month. A month. You were his guardian? The kid was hanging out with a gang close to the school. Story 21, I worked at a BD school, and I have a ton of these, but the worst of which goes as follows. Me, principal, we know the truth, threatening tone. We have very little history on your son, and he seems to be showing signs of PTSD from abuse. Dad, not skipping a beat, you don't think he could remember that far back? Do you didn't act shocked or angry? No denial. I worked with offenders for 3 years prior to that and had never seen anything like it. I drank a lot that night. I'm a high school history teacher. One of my courses was comparative religions and philosophies. I essentially taught every major world religion and political ideology. I'm an open atheist, but I teach the course with objectivity and I teach with respect because I have students across all religious backgrounds. I never insult, condemn, or offend, and I encourage my students to keep an open mind as well. I had a parent contact me for a conference about 3 weeks into the first term. Her son was a freshman. His freshman U.S. I class immediately followed my senior level religions course. One day, when he was coming into class, he overheard me discussing the 3 Abrahamic prophets: Moses, Jesus, Abraham with his senior. Apparently, he went home, and told his mother I called Abraham a prophet. They're evangelical Christians. This apparently infuriated her enough that she had to call me to arrange a meeting ASAP. She came into the meeting and immediately started insulting me, questioning my intelligence at training qualifications. I have multiple degrees, so nah girl, and hilariously calling me a heretic for suggesting Abraham and Moses were in the same category as Jesus. I called the principal into the conference as a witness to both the lesson itself I was being observed and as a witness to the meeting. She railed into him, too, asking how he could possibly think it was all right to allow me to teach such anti-Jesus heresy in a school. His response, well, I'm Jewish, so there's that. It took everything in me not to myself from laughing. I never had a problem with her again. Story 22, I haven't taught in 15 years, but my first year as a high school world history 10th grade and American history 11th grade teacher was a doozy. It also pretty much drove me out of teaching. I had the mother of one of my American history students come in for a parent-teacher conference to complain about her son failing my class. He was a senior and repeating American history in order to have enough credits to graduate. And according to this mother, I should be nice and just give her son a passing grade. The problem was that the kid never turned in homework, slept in class, refused to do quizzes, and ignored tests. I think he had a 1, and only because he turned in a single assignment. Mom said it was because he had a full-time job and worked from 4 p.m. until midnight as a vet's assistant in order to help support the family. Mom, dad, 5 kids. Mom was a stay-at-home, but all the kids were in school. Now, I took pity on the kid. I understand in a rural community that family is the most important thing impressed upon them from an early age. But as a teacher, it was my job to teach, not give students a pass because things were tough. It also wasn't as if my requirements were incredibly high or tough. There were generally 20 homework assignments per quarter, about 2 to 3 a week, maybe 8 quizzes, and 2 to 3 tests. I generally reviewed everything on the tests, and the quizzes covered the reading material from the night before. Mr. Scholastic would walk in the door, sit in his chair, and then immediately go to sleep. I tried for weeks to keep him awake, but the moment I turned my head, he was in slumberland. I had 30 other students that needed my attention. So I just wrote him off. So as Mom is making all these excuses as to why I had to give her son a passing grade, I'm quiet. When she finally stopped for air, I decided on a course of action. Hey, Race, what it'll do? I can give your son a passing grade, but that diminishes the work of my other students. As the teacher, how I grade students is left to my discretion. Clearly, your son isn't meeting the academic requirements for a passing grade in my class. But again, my discretion, considering that your son works as a vet tech to support the family, and that bringing money home is more important than his schooling. I just have one question to ask when you fill out your son's taxes. What do you put down as his occupation? Student, Mom answers without missing a beat. I smile. And that's why your son will not be getting a passing grade. Best of luck next year. Had she answered vet tech or vet assistant, I would have gone ahead and given the son AD. Needless to say, the mom had nothing good to say about me and bitched up a storm to the administration. Story 23J14M had long, filthy fingernails, just gagged me to sit next to him to work on subject matter. But I toughed it out. It helped him clean and trim nails. Gross mama comes screaming to school because his long nails made it so much better when he scratched mama's back, you. Story 24, the worst, was when a mother of student in our music department threatened to her daughter out of the school if she wasn't given a solo, "Oh Holy Night," in the Christmas concert. I explained that not only did her daughter not have the skills or voice required for the part, but that she had also made it clear she didn't want to do it, that it was entirely her mother's attempt to turn her into a star. Story 25, TBH, my 4th grade teacher had a terrible conference with my mom and another kid's parents. That kid had been verbally harassing me with explicit comments, essentially telling me he was going to have with me, that he liked my butt, and I was overweight. It did not develop early. It was incredibly degrading, and other students heard him say it and actually reported it before I did. Even the girl who bullied me told on him because she thought it was gross. So my mom had the meeting, and she told me that his parents were both very dismissive and very stupid. They didn't understand the gravity of the situation. He was put into another classroom, despite my mom requesting that he be put into the special ed program, where he actually needed to be because they served both children with disabilities and children with behavioral issues. He fixated on another girl and actually touched her. He was expelled. Story 26, a student was reading way behind grade level, but mom thought he was gifted. Myself and a reading specialist brought on grade level reading passage to the conference and had the student read it. He made 77 errors in a 130-word passage. Mom looked at us and said, "See, I told you he could read." Story 27 showed up on meth. Wasn't the worst parent conference. They were rather congenial, all things considered. Still had the legal obligation to call the police. That sucked. Edit, they showed up on meth. Not me, they. Story 28, I'm the student. But this had to be awkward. In kindergarten, my teacher asked the class what they wanted to be when they grew up. I said a garbage man. Concerned, my teacher met with my parents only to find out that my dad was a garbage man. Whoops. Story 29. When I was a student teacher in a 4th grade classroom, we had 2 moms scheduled for back-to-back conferences get into a fight just outside the classroom. My 7 months pregnant supervisor had to restrain one of the girls to prevent her from joining the fight while I frantically called the office. The other girl pulled her toddler sister around the corner. At least, eventually some other staff heard the commotion and broke it up, and a police officer who was at the school for unrelated reasons got involved. The 2 moms were separated, and I ended up waiting in the classroom with the instigator mom and her daughter for the officer to finish interviewing her. Daughter was freaking out, sobbing that her mom was going to get arrested. Mom scolds daughter for crying, then turns to me and asks, "So, how's daughter doing in English?" Fortunately, we got interrupted before the mom tried to have the whole conference. The worst part of the whole situation, the fight was started because one of these 9-year-olds had been nasty to the other over Facebook. Story 30, the kid showed up, but the parent didn't, and after a few minutes, the girl said she would go home and get her mom no cell phone, house phone. The girl was gone about 20 minutes, came back with mom who was reeking of meth. So was the girl. A few furtive calls to the police and CPS, and they were both hauled away. We never did get to talk to the mom about the daughter's hygiene issues and academic struggles, but I feel like we solved the problem nonetheless. Story 31, I hate to pull the cliche, not a teacher, but I have one that one of my high school English American history teachers mentioned once. He was in a conference with a girl and her father, and the girl had grades good enough that she was going to be the first person in her family to go to college. She was eligible for a ton of scholarships. But as it stood, she wasn't going to get any of them because her dad didn't want to tell anyone what his annual income was. My teacher said that was the closest he came to hitting one of his students' parents. Story 32, this will be buried, but I have 3. One 6th grade boy, total pain and the troublemaker. He was hateful, naughty, he was loud, rude, and also very small for his age. At one point of the year right after Christmas, he was really acting like a complete and total bag in class, so it was time for a conference. I was expecting his grandmother because that's who he lived with, but nope. Here comes Mama. Mama had just gotten out of jail after 3 years. This is why he's being extra pain in the ass. She proceeds to tell me, in front of him, that he was the worst mistake she ever made, and if she could have afforded an abortion, she would have the poor kid. The poor kid, his face was the epitome of dejection. I immediately turned the conference around and stopped talking about his behavior and started talking about his good qualities. I felt so badly for him. 2nd, 7th grade English class, a smart kid, but he was the kind of kid who made fun of other kids when they made a mistake. He would call them stupid out in class if they answered wrong and make them feel really low. He was also that weird kind of kid who does strange things just to weird other kids out, like violently snapping a pencil and then jabbing the pieces at the other kids, spitting a loogie on the carpet, pretending to be deaf, etc. One day in my class, he bit another kid, 7th grade, so there was a conference. The kid sat in his mother's lap. They were nearly the same size. It was so awkward and grinned at me the whole conference. I'd say something and Shed defend him. It was sick. His eyes were sparkling, and he knew he was never going to get in trouble. The smug look on his face was unreal. He was looking at me, and his eyes were saying, "You're never gonna win, lady. You've been doing this for years." Would not surprise me to find out he is a rapist or something like that now. 3rd, 5th grade, this was in 2003. So little 5th grade African-American boys were super into having long hair, so they could have braids. All the cool kids in my class had braids. This one little dip hadn't been doing his homework. He was failing BC, he was a stupid, and B did no work at all. Of course, the end of the year is coming, and it's found out that he is in trouble. And so finally his parents decide to take action. I get to school one morning early, and there's this gigantic man waiting outside my classroom door with this little boy. He gets right up in my face and starts telling me that I'm trying to fail his son on purpose. Why? I ask him to explain. He tells me that his son told him that I taped his locker shut, and that's why he never brought any books home. I had to sit there, stare the man in the eyes, ask him if that sounded logical or true. He finally realizes how insane that sounds, and I show him his son's locker. It is a pigsty, and all the books are under piles of trash in the locker. Father apologizes to me and leaves with his son. 40 minutes later, school starts, and walks this kid with a bald head. His dad went home and shaved his precious braids off for line. I was floored. It was awesome. That kid gave me 0 for the rest of the year. He also started doing his work. Too bad it took so long. Story 33. I was teaching psychology at a private high school in Shanghai. One of my students had the reputation of being the local Coke. Always came into class with bloodshot eyes, and clothed from the night before. She's pulling straight FS due to missing classes. She has intelligence, but she just isn't there half the time. Then I hear rumors that this girl, 16, going on 17, was practically living with a 30-year-old with a bad reputation. I figure I should make a few calls. I wanted a conference with her parents. The mother was living with a pool boy, and the father was dodging my emails. After a month of sending emails and notes home to her dad, I get to sit down during the parent-teacher conferences. The first words out of his mouth were normally, "I don't bother with small stuff like this, but you just wouldn't leave me alone." That explained everything. The final straw was when she offered to felate me for a passing grade. So no, I wasn't just being nosy. She was later expelled for selling some coke on the school grounds. The police didn't get involved because her dad made a generous donation to the school read principal. Her dad offered me a few $1,000s to just let her through in front of the other parents at the conference after I showed him his daughter's grades. Real class act.